3 videos in 3 days. What can I say? Welcome back to the channel, to my loyal subscribers. Because those y'all who subscribe, so fantastic. I always see YouTubers are like getting hundreds of thousands of views, and they're like, but guys, please subscribe. 99% of you aren't subscribed, and they show their analytics thing. And I was just looking at mine, and it's like 75-80% of my views are from subscribers. I'm just like, I mean, it was 22 views. But anyways, we're gonna be reading Putnam today. He's an anti-realist. I just had the lecture for this, so I kind of already know what's going on. Give a little brief overview about what Putnam stands for. Essentially that all of there's no objective true reality. All of them are real, and all of them are equally not real. It's kind of like to say that the world is composed of atoms, or protons and neutrons and electrons, is true. And to say that the world is composed of lamps and chairs and tables is also true. There's no true object. There's rather a bunch of different definitions. But apparently it didn't really catch on. Everyone's just direct realists. In that there is one true reality. Anyways, though, let's get right into the reading after 2 minutes of me yapping and yammering. Is there still anything to say about reality and truth? The man on the street, Eddington reminds us, visualizes a table as solid. That is, as mostly solid matter. But physics has discovered that the table is mostly empty space, that the distance between the particles is immense in relation to the radius of the electron, or the nucleus of one of the atoms of which the table consists. One reaction to this state of affairs, the reaction of Wilfrid Sellars, is to deny that there are tables at all as we ordinarily conceive them, although he chooses an ice cube rather than a table as his example. The common sense conception of ordinary, middle-sized material objects such as tables and ice cubes, the manifest image, is simply false in Sellars' view, although not without at least some cognitive value. There are real objects that the tables and ice cubes in the manifest image picture, according to Sellars, even if these real objects are not the layman's table and ice cubes. I don't agree with this view of Sellars, but I hope you'll forgive me if I use it, or the phenomenon of its appearance on the philosophical scene, to highlight certain features of the philosophical debate about realism. First of all, this view illustrates the fact that realism with a capital R doesn't always deliver what the innocent expect of it. If there's any appeal of realism which is wholly legitimate, it is the appeal to common sense feeling that of course there are tables and chairs, and any philosophy that tells us that there really aren't, that there are only sense data or only texts, or whatever is more than slightly crazy. Or whatever is more than slightly crazy. In appealing to this common sense feeling, realism reminds me of the seducer in the old-fashioned melodrama. In the melodramas of the 1890s, the seducer always promised various things to the innocent maiden, which he failed to deliver when the time came. In this case, the realist, evil seducer, promises common sense, the innocent maiden, that he will rescue her from her enemies, idealists, Kantians, neo-Kantians, pragmatists, and the fearsome, self-described realist, Nelson Goodman, who, the realist says, want to deprive her of the good old ice cubes and chairs. Faced with this dreadful prospect, the fair maiden naturally opts for the company of the commonsensical realist. But when they have traveled together for a little while the scientific realist breaks the news that the maiden is going to get isn't her ice cubes and tables and chairs. In fact, all there really is, the scientific realist tells her, of her breakfast, is what finished science will say there is, whatever that may be. She is left with a promissory note for she knows not what, and the assurance that even if there aren't tables and chairs, still there are some Dinjansuk, that her manifest image, or her folk physics, as some scientific realist put it, picture, Some will say that the lady has been had. Thus it is clear that the name realism can be claimed by or given to at least two very different philosophical attitudes, and in fact too many. The philosopher, wow, this is my channel name, philosopher, the philosopher who claims that only scientific objects really exist, and that much, if not all of the common sense world is mere projection, claims to be a realist. But so does the philosopher who insists that there really are chairs and ice cubes, and some of these ice cubes really are pink. And these two attitudes, these two images of the world, can lead to and have led to many different programs for philosophy. Quick aside, he talks about color a lot, and one of the problems with realists is prescribing colors to things, saying that a pink ice cube is indeed pink. Where, if we look at it, if a colorblind person looks at it, it appears a different color, or if an animal looks at it, it appears a different color. And the scientific breakdown of that would be this wavelength of light is pink to the standard view. So his claim is that it isn't just one thing; it is pink and the other things. It just depends on who looks at it. But there's no one objective truth to it. There's no one pink. And I think he then goes on to reject the idea of primary versus secondary qualities. But we'll see. Back to the reading. Husserl traces the first line of thought, the line that denies that there really are common sense objects, back to Galileo, and with good reason. The present Western worldview depends, according to Husserl, on a new way of conceiving external objects, the way of mathematical physics. An external thing is conceived of as congeries of particles by atomists, or as some kind of extended disturbance in the 17th century, a vortex, and later a collection of fields. Either way, the table in front of me, or the object that I picture as a table, is described by mathematical formulas, as Husserl says. At this, he points out, is what above all came into Western thinking with the Galilean Revolution. The idea of the external world, he really loves quotes, as something whose description in itself consists of mathematical formulas. It is important to this way of thinking that certain familiar properties of the table, its size and shape and location, are real properties, primary, as describable, for example, in the language of Descartes' analytical geometry. Other properties, however, the so-called secondary properties, of which color is a chief example, are not treated as real properties in the same sense. No, a current, non-dispositional property of that sort of molecules or that space-time region, recognized in mathematical physics, can be said to what we all along called its color. What about dispositional properties? It is often claimed that color is simply a function of reflectancy, that is, of the disposition of an object or of the surface of an object to selectively absorb certain wavelengths of incident light and reflect others. But this doesn't really do much for the reality of colors. Not only has recent research shown that this account is much too simple, because changes of reflectancy across edges turn out to play an important role in determining the colors we see, but reflectancy itself does not have one uniform physical explanation. A red star and a red apple and a reddish glass of colored water are red for quite different physical reasons. In fact, there may well be an infinite number of different physical conditions which could result in the disposition to reflect or emit red light and absorb light of other wavelengths. A dispositional property whose underlying non-dispositional explanation is so very non-uniform is simply incapable of being represented as a mathematical function of the dynamical variables. And these, the dynamical variables, are the parameters that this way of thinking treats as the characteristics of external objects. Another problem is that hues turn out to be much more subjective than we thought. In fact, any shade on the color chart in the green part of the spectrum will be classed as standard green by some subjects, even if it lies at the extreme yellow-green or the extreme blue-green, and in some, no characteristic recognized by this way of thinking, no well-behaved function of the dynamical variables corresponds to such a familiar property of objects as red or green. The idea that there is a property all red objects have in common, the same in all cases, and another property all green objects have in common, the same in all cases, is kind of an illusion on the view we have come more and more to take for granted since the age of Descartes and Locke. However, Locke and Descartes did give us a sophisticated substitute for our pre-scientific notion of the color, a substitute that has perhaps come to seem mere post-scientific common sense to most people. This substitute involves the idea of sense datum, except that in the 17th and 18th century vocabulary, this sense data is referred to as ideas or impressions. The red sweater I see is not red in the way I thought it was. There is no physical magnitude which is its redness, but it does have a disposition, a power in the 17th and 18th century idiom, to affect me in a certain way, to cause me to have sense data. In these, the sense data do truly have a simple, uniform, non-dispositional sort of redness. This is the famous picture, the dualistic picture of the physical world and its primary qualities on the one hand, and the mind and its sense data on the other, that philosophers have been wrangling over since the time of Galileo, as Husserl says. And it is Husserl's idea, as it was the idea of William James, who influenced Husserl, that this picture is disastrous. But why should we regard it as disastrous? It was once shocking, to be sure, but as I have already said, it has been now widely accepted as the post-scientific common sense. What is really wrong with this picture? For one thing, solidity is in much the same boat as color. If objects do not have color as they naively seem to, no more do they have solidity as they naively seem to. It is this that leads scholars to say that such common sense objects as ice cubes do not really exist at all. What is our conception of a typical common sense object, if not as something solid or liquid, which exhibits certain colors? What there really are, in Sellers' scientific metaphysics, are objects of mathematical physics on the one hand, and raw feels on the other. Raw feels. That sounds like a douchey way of describing it. What are the raw feels of this party? This is precisely the picture that I have just described as disastrous. He used two quotes on this one. Everyone else is just actually one of these. It is the picture that denies precisely the common man's kind of realism, his realism about tables and chairs. The reply to me, the reply of a philosopher who accepts the post-Galilean picture will make is obvious. You are just nostalgic for an older and simpler world. This picture works. Our acceptance of it is an inference to the best explanation. We cannot regard it as an objection to a view that does not preserve anything that laymen once falsely believed. That's the reply. If it is an inference to the best explanation, it is a strange one, however. How does the familiar explanation of what happens when I see something red go? The light strikes the object, say, a sweater, as reflected to my eye. There is an image on the retina. Berkeley knew about images on the retina, and so did Descartes, even if the wave aspect of light was not well understood until much later. The resultant nerve impulses. Descartes knew there was some kind of transmission along the nerves, even if he was wrong about its nature. And it is not clear we know its nature either, since there is again debate about the significance of chemical, as opposed to electrical, transmissions from neuron to neuron. There are events in the brain, some of which we understand thanks to the work of Hubel and Wiesel, David Marr, and others. And then, this is the mysterious part, there's somehow a sense datum, or a raw feel. This is an explanation? An explanation that involves connections of a kind we do not understand at all. Nomological danglers, Herbert Fiegel called them. And concerning which we have not even the sketch of a theory, is an explanation through something more obscure than the phenomenon to be explained. As has been pointed out by thinkers as different from one another as William James, Husserl, and John Austin, every single part of the sense datum story is supposition, theory, and theory of the most peculiar kind. Yet the epistemological role sense data are supposed to play by traditional philosophy required them to be what is given, to be what we are absolutely sure of independently of scientific theory. The kind of scientific realism we have inherited from the 17th century has not lost all its prestige even yet, but it has saddled us with a disastrous picture of the world. It is high time we looked for a different picture. First section. There's so many pages of this reading. This class has a lot of reading, and a lot of it's... God, this guy, he uses single quotations, every sentence. I don't know. I don't even know what he's trying to say with it. I don't see why this view didn't pick up any headway, according to my professor. Apparently, everyone is a direct realist. But I feel that this view is kind of... I'm surprised it's not accepted more often. I guess it's a little complicated, as opposed to saying there is a world that is made up of objects. It's saying the world is... To say the world is made up of anything isn't true. It's because you can't separate it from ourselves. It's made up of what we see that it's made up of and what we theorize it's made up of. So it's both made up of the atoms and of the objects as a whole. So I suppose it's not so much of an answer as a complete non-answer. So maybe that's why. But I feel it's the most compatible with how we live in our real life. When I learned about atoms, I wasn't like, okay, I guess, post-it notes aren't real. They're just a collection of atoms. We can't observe them as a collection of atoms, so it's still a post-it note to us. And the fact that it is a collection of atoms doesn't take away from its post-it noteness. And it's the same with like flavor and sight. One chemical composition can, one person will taste sour, the other sweet, like cilantro. Some people taste soap. But that doesn't mean there's a true flavor of cilantro. It's interesting that we assign the colorblind people, even the name colorblind is implying there is a color, you're just blind to see it. The people who taste cilantro like soap, they're wrong. We just assume we're, the people who have the more consistent taste, the more common taste are the correct one. But Putnam is saying that everyone's correct because the whole world is made up of mind and body. So if it tastes like soap to you, then it does taste like soap. I kind of like it, personally. Maybe after I read the rest of it, I won't. But that's the video for today. I'm so tired. I hope you are too, if you're listening to this. I'm gonna make it exactly 19 minutes. Okay. Bye-bye, guys. Sleep well.